I am Brian Gorman. I'm managing editor of Change Management Review. On behalf of our editor-in-chief, Teresa Moulton, and myself, welcome you to this experiment, a case study practicum. And Bill, I was looking back through things earlier, and you and I actually first had our first conversation in August of last year. And as I think I said on the video, Bill contacted us about doing an article or a podcast or something, and just listening to not just his stories, because he's a great storyteller, but the learning that he has to share with the Change Management Review audience. I said, let's try to figure out some other way of getting out to our subscriber list. So here we are, 5-6 months later. I'm not going to run through Bill's bio because we covered that, and he talked about himself and his business on the video. We're going to start off and we'll put the questions that were submitted in advance on the screen. Bill is going to walk through the answers. Again, in the interest of time, he's not going to be reading all of the questions, but he will be answering them as completely and succinctly as he can. About 7:50, we're hoping that we'll be ready to go into breakout rooms. And we're going to put you in breakout rooms of approximately 5 people to talk through with one another what will we do, how would we approach this particular change initiative if we were the change practitioner in charge. In your breakout rooms, you are going to have the use of whiteboards. And I will show you how to do that before we go into the breakouts, but we're going to use the Google Jamboard feature, which gives you a whiteboard, and you just start adding little sticky notes to it. You can rearrange them. So when we come back out, which will be about 8:20, so we're talking hopefully for a half an hour in the breakout room, you'll have something to report out from. When you do the report out, again, we're going to ask you to be as succinct as you can. And as we move through from one breakout room to the next, because it looks like right now we're going to have 4, if more people join us, we're going to have 5, would ask that you not repeat what you've heard from the earlier report outs. What else has your group brought onto the table as part of your approach that we haven't heard from someone else? And then about 8:45, Bill is going to tell you how he addressed the situation, what the outcome was, and answer any final questions. So any questions real quickly before we get started? Okay. So Bill.
Okay.
Here we go.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And I see there are a few familiar faces, but there are also some new faces. So it's a chance for me to make new friendships. I look forward to your participation, your thoughts, because we all learn from each other. And hopefully you had a good Christmas, New Year break and refreshed and started well in this new but challenging year. You'll have to excuse, as you see from my accent, I'm an Australian. So at times I might fall into some Aussie slang. Now, we're going to go through the questions first. So rather than me read them out, because you can read 3 times faster, so you can basically read 3 times faster than I can speak. So the first question, yes, it was his first CEO position. His background, he was a trained engineer, and he had done some postgraduate qualifications in management. He'd only worked in that organisation. It had many divisions. The 3 silos, they all had the same client, but offered different services to it, and there was some overlap. But basically, those three silos regarded themselves very much as independent units. No, the cost cutting had begun before the idea for the change, and I really can't answer the second part about that, the number of years they've been under pressure. It'd been a couple of years. There was no exits of interviews done why people left. Basically, they were a full, most people were specialists, if not some of the leaders in their field, so they could easily get jobs elsewhere. So he was promoted from outside that division, but within the same organisations. And he was trying to revitalise a lot of the technical sides of the industry. As I said in the preamble and so forth, he was concentrating initially on the technical side and what I call the rational side of management, around five forces of Porter: analysis, business process review, re-engineering, etc. So that was the focus there. Next slide, please, Brian. No, the new CEO hadn't been able to communicate to his staff what the revitalisation was about. The three units regard themselves as separate silos and basically had regarded themselves as independent. So bringing them together was not an easy exercise. Concentrating on strategic planning. Yes, they're doing all that, but basically getting nowhere. He'd given 2 years to change it. The first year he'd concentrate on things like strategic planning, technical challenges, value analysis, etc. But really no changes of any substance. Being a government organisation, it was the politicians who said they wanted to look at outsourcing the activities of that organisation. Could it be done by private enterprise? How is success described? Not so much on the financial goals, but more on the customer satisfaction. And the customers generally were fairly satisfied. Governance, well, that's an interesting one because he was ultimately going to be responsible for the change in performance, but he had to find a way of pushing that responsibility and accountability down, and he was struggling. No, there hadn't been a change agent or champion network started. The outsourcing is a possibility of the entire group. The government's approach was to outsource as much as possible. There's a very strong union, and basically it had negotiated pretty good packages for anybody who was going to have to leave. Yeah, that really answers probably the second one. Yes, he was very focused on self. The people did not know, I and he were the only two involved in this who knew that his promotion and future career depended on success of this. Now, I think there's one more page of questions. I hope you don't mind, I'm going through this very fast.
We'll come back for any additional questions or further
How
dive.
aligned are the three divisional leaders? They're basically not aligned. They very much doing their own things and had their own sort of silos which they dominated and were very possessive of it. Yes, there had been major changes before in the organisation, and there was a fair bit of scar tissue still floating around about that. No, he hadn't had a chance to tell them the story of the change, because what was happening was the three heads of the units, the sections, basically used to filter information up and down, etc. Filtered information going down to their staff, and anything that was coming up, they filtered as well. They were leaving the organisation because, especially the technical people, they were in high demand in other areas. How does the CEO define success? Well, obviously he had a personal definition that his future career depended upon it. and that probably dominated more than the organisational success. So obviously the two were linked. They were all in the same foxhole together, the three charge of the units, because they had a common enemy, which was the idea of forming this new division, etc. And they were very, very strong in their views and value their independence. Now, I think that covers the question. Now, I've gone through that at a very, very fast pace. Does anybody want enlargement anywhere?
Feel free to unmute and jump in with any questions you've got for Bill here.
I do talk at a fast pace, so feel free to say, hang on a minute, I want to know more about that. And if you'll get any comments, that's appreciated too. But I think that goes through the questions that were sent in with the registrations, etc.
Well, all in a day's work, it sounds like.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I can say it's not untypical, this type of situation I find myself in. We were lucky enough to work with about 700 worldwide organisations, and there are a lot of common themes. But at the same time, there were some unique things of this organisation one had to be careful of.
Bill, it's Tricia Stiggy. Pardon me if you've already answered this, and maybe you don't have this in Aussie. Do you have public versus private, sector versus public sector versus private sector kinds of things going on? I'm just trying to figure out if this was a public company or.
No, it was a public sector. It's been 75 years in the public sector.
Okay.
But there was this, say, the threat of commercialising it. It was a new government came in, and one of its policies was to commercialise as much as possible.
Bill, this is Matt Sinelli. I'm interested in this just as I glanced over it before we met, that I did a similar project with our state and their Department of Transportation. What has their experience been with outsourcing? Have other groups been outsourced in this particular division or in related divisions?
No, this was fairly new. The organisation had really been pretty well untouched in the sense of outsourcing for about 75 years. It had been left alone. So it had a strong history and a strong culture of we survive all these threats and so forth. So it was a new concept to them.
And just to confirm, it sounds like that digital technologies, IT infrastructure and applications have been keeping pace with.
Oh, they were leaders in that field in their industry. They were the leaders. That's also why a lot of them could get jobs outside. They weren't sort of stuck to that particular field because they had the digitalisation. Yeah, they were up with the latest.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, Bill. This is Jen Fullerton. I had two questions, and I'm not sure how much detail you can add because I know you're protecting the company. But why were budgets being cut, and what were the primary outcomes of the division?
Well, the budgets have been cut. That was, again, a government directive to reduce budgets. It had come into power on the basis it was going to sort of reduce the public sector where it could. Now, your second question was, I've missed that one, was about?
What were the primary outcomes of the division? You mentioned that customer satisfaction was really a driver, but what are some of the other outcomes?
Well, basically, they had grown pretty inefficient, and they did really have too many. They're overstaffed, etc. And there was a need to sort of rationalise that a bit. especially with technology coming in and automation, they didn't sort of need as many staff, but they were very reluctant to handle that issue.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. And as soon as I get the I know I've got this. Oh, okay. Here we go. Okay, what you're seeing are a series of whiteboards. The whiteboard that you use will be the one showing your room number, and they're just directly in sequence. So if you're in breakout room number 1, you'll use the whiteboard number 1. If you're not, you just click up above here to the correct whiteboard. Literally all you have to do is go off to the left, click on the sticky note, and it will open up. Type what you want and hit save, and the sticky note goes on the board. You click on
Hi,
it.
Brian, I don't think we can see your screen. Sorry.
Says I'm sharing it. Can you
must
see
I
it?
don't see anything either.
Oh,
Is it an alternate, another monitor?
there we go. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so let me walk through this again. The boards are numbered. So if you're in breakout room number 1, use the board on number 1, and everybody can put notes on the board at the same time. And I'll explain how to get here in just a moment. If you're in breakout room number 2, you would click and go to room number 2 and so forth. To add a note, you just go over to the left, click on sticky notes, type your text and click save, and the note goes up on the board. When you're done, you click outside the notes and the notes close, or there's a close button, and then you can take and drag the notes anywhere you want on the board. So it's virtually like using a virtual whiteboard. I'm going to put a URL in the chat. Once you click on that, it will open up the whiteboards in your browser. So just like stay in the Zoom room until you get into your breakout, but then just like you would move from Word to PowerPoint or to your browser, just move to the whiteboard and go to work. So any questions? And that's beautiful. We are right on schedule for what we said. So I'm setting the breakout rooms for 30 minutes and off you go. Hey, welcome back. As you debrief, I am going to do the screen share and have your rooms board up. We're going to start with room number 1. And the first thing I'd like to do actually is for each person in room number 1 to just identify, give us your name, where you are in the world, how long you have been doing work as a change practitioner. So anyone from room number 1 jump in?
Chris, why don't you start? Chris.
Yep.
Lunny.
Okay. Hear me okay? Yeah. Good evening. My name is Chris Lunny. I work for Highmark Health here in Pennsylvania. My role is in the change space in the lean process improvement area. Been kind of bounced around over my course of my career, doing change work for a little over 20 years in both public sector and in private sector.
Leanne?
Apologies that my camera isn't working. I'm in Vancouver. I've been in the change capacity for about 15 years. I'm the Director of Change Strategy for Central Run Credit Unions, which is the digital driver or engine for the Canadian credit union system. Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. Matt? You're on mute, Matt.
Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Sinelli, and I'm here from the Philadelphia suburbs. I have been in change management for 10 years. I have my own company called Le Savoir Faire, and primarily I've worked with large system implementations and IT or business process transformations.
Thanks, Matt. Jen?
Hello, my name is Jen Fullerton. I'm from the Denver greater area in Colorado here. I am a novice to change management. I helped an organization implement a new compensation structure. And then my master's degree and PhD work is also in organizational development and change leadership. So I'm happy to be here and honored to talk with you.
Thanks, Jen. And I'm Tricia Stiggy. I'm in the Philadelphia area also. I cut my teeth in the OD world and focused on change management probably in the last 15 years, change management, change leadership, and lots of different organizations, but was also part of the World Trade Center gathering of the 5,000 to figure out what to do there to rebuild. So that was a cool experience. All right, so Brian, on our debrief, do you want us to, I don't want to steal everybody else's thunder in other groups. Should we just, how do we do this? Let's see.
We have 7 or 8 minutes if we need it per breakout room, or actually maybe 5 or 6. So just give us the highlights, what you think are some of the key actions.
Okay, well, they were kind of all there on the sticky note. We tried to pull them all together, but and others jump in, please, if any. But we wondered about the story, how well the story had really, what kind of story was being created and communicated by the CEO to kind of inspire this group of very bright and very satisfied employees, if you will, as far as what their technical work was, since they were so progressive technology. The other thing is we were thinking that probably he needed to create some of his own coalitions among leaders who were his allies, who were going to be the people that he needed to try and influence to start, sharing the story. We weren't sure about the real level of change readiness, so thought we probably needed to do a little bit of change readiness, and we wanted to gather some more data around engagement and morale and motivation factors. So those were our key recommendations.
Great, thank you, Tricia. Okay, breakout room 2. If you would briefly introduce yourselves, where you are and how long you've been practicing change management.
I can start. Alex Sawitsky here. I'm from Edmonton, Alberta in Canada. I've been doing this kind of work for 25 plus years. Currently I work as a change specialist for university, and I also teach change management.
Thank you.
I'm Emily Koft. I'm in the Boston, Massachusetts area. Been a change management practitioner for 20 plus years. Spent 17 years in management consulting doing OCM work, and back it on the industry side, life sciences, leading change globally. And I'm also a certified coach.
Who else is on? Go ahead.
My name is Amber Atterbury. I'm from the San Jose area, and I am about to finish my master's in industrial organizational psychology, and I'm looking to move into the change management field.
Anyone else on team 2?
Yeah, Eileen Duncan from Brisbane, Australia. I'm formerly a lawyer, but I know I'm a certified professional coach and practitioner in team coaching, and I don't have the practical experience of change management, but I've been involved in change management with various organizations that I've been part of.
Okay, and is that it for room 2?
Now we're missing Robin and Max.
So let's hear from Robin and Max, and then we can debrief room 2.
Okay. Can you even see me? I can't see myself now. Can you see me? Okay. So I'm Max, and I'm from the Indianapolis area, expecting to move to Denver pretty soon, and so I'm absorbing.
Great, thanks. And Robin? You're muted, Robin. Robin, you're still muted.
There we go. How's
There
that?
we go.
Better? There we are. Sorry, folks. I'm on the Sunshine Coast on Queensland, Australia, and I work with little companies that are in trouble and bring about change in their structure and finances to try and make them more successful, which means, as we've found along the way, that sometimes the boss is the trouble. So that's what I'm doing, and I pull on some of the knowledge that I've learned over the years on how to do that.
Great, thank you. Okay. Room 2. Tell us what came up for you.
Alec, you want to start and then I'll finish up with the external? You're on mute.
It's always better when I turn off mute. We had 2 views. One is internal and one is external. And so on the internal side, if I start there, there's 2 parts to it. There's the mindset and behaviors of the individual, especially the CEO. And then there's the broader culture, which is the collective mindset. So that's the internal part. So we really need to talk as a trusted advisor. We need to talk to the CEO and find out what makes him tick. Before we even approach anything to do on the outside, we need to find out what's important to him. How does he feel the organization perceives him, and so on. And then as far as culture, that's very important, because we need to get his view on whether what his culture is strong on, and maybe what's holding back the transformation that he's looking for. So there's the internal perspective, and then I'll turn it over to Emily for an external perspective on things that could be done or should be done. Emily?
Thanks. I'm trying to read the stickies, but in essence, once we kind of get a better understanding of the CEO, we talked about surveying kind of the employee population in that division to get an understanding of employee engagement, employee satisfaction, the perceptions, and perhaps there's historical data that speaks to that. But we went on to gather that information, use that to, 1, help inform the CEO, 2, help inform a steering committee that we would establish to help support the CEO, made up of key leaders, and also to work with the middle managers to get their buy-in to, understanding the reality of the situation, the morale situation, just having them buy into the future state vision based on, where does the organization need to go based on, where employees are at. So that's kind of, where we kind of focused our discussion on that discovery phase, and then, that as a basis for planning and implementation.
And then just to add to that, from there, we are in a better position to develop a change strategy.
Got it. Thank you. How about room 3? Actually, just one, if I can jump in just 1 second before room 3, just recorded a podcast for Change Management Review today with Nancy Murphy. I've been doing change in one way or another very intentionally since 1967, 68, so 50 some years. And I heard something from Nancy today that I thought was just brilliant. She said her company looks for cultural artifacts. And she was explaining, and my background is in cultural anthropology, so that really struck me. She gave an example of an organization that was trying to get women into its top ranks, and they hired mentors. They hired or established a committee to help them do this, and it just never happened. Women reached a certain level, and then they left the organization. And so they started looking around. And she said, they'd do their weekly stand-ups and shout-outs, and it would be things like, we want to thank Chris and his team for staying up all night to get that proposal out. And oh, by the way, the stand-ups were at 7 o'clock in the morning. So there was the implicit messages were that you couldn't have a personal life. And so family care and child care and all of those kinds of things that typically in the home fall to the woman, the women were getting the message, you can only go so far in this organization implicitly. So if you don't have that in your toolkit now, I invite you to add it, because I think that's a great thing to look for. And room 3, let's have you introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Heather Belvin. I'm in Montreal. There's a few other Canadians here. Unofficially, I've been doing things related to change management for maybe 5 years, but I actually was doing more in operations training and process improvement for a payment processing company. I've just gone out on my own freelancing within the last few months. So like I think Jen said, a bit of a novice technically. And I listen to your podcast every day when I'm out doing something physical activity. So it's great. I'm really happy that we're able to do this.
I'm Jennifer Bolig. I've been an org change practitioner for 12 plus years. I'm in the Kansas City area, and I work with a healthcare insurance payer.
Who else do we have from room 3?
Hi, this is Anna here. You hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'm in Canada too. I'm in Toronto. I study organizational psychology, and I've been working in the past 10 years in transformational projects and integrations of banks. So a lot of change management there. So never with the formal title, but always applying the framework for change management and organizational design. So very interesting to be here and hearing so many different perspectives. And that thank you for that tip about cultural artifacts, because I think right now it's top of mind and to being more inclusive and diverse, and that's key to consider, like the cultural artifact, not just the intention, but really what's behind. So thank you, Ryan, for sharing that.
That podcast will actually be released, I believe, the week after next. And Nancy actually begins by talking about the importance of bringing more feminine leadership, not necessarily women in leadership, but even men who are leaders need to become more like women in their leadership style. And she really makes a strong case for that. So it's going to be a very interesting podcast for people. Okay, is there anyone else in room 3 before we share screen?
I think we had Mariama. I'm not sure if she's still here.
Okay, who's going to debrief us on room 3?
Well, first, I would like to apologize for the lack of sticky notes. That's on me.
That's okay.
As
long as you got the message.
We didn't really talk about who was going to talk about it. We Canadians like to just take over, so I can just jump in. But if anyone else wants to do that, yell at me now.
Go for it. Go for it.
Okay. Okay. So what we were looking at were a few practical things that we could do. Just let me kind of figure out what to go through. So, okay. First of all, to get the CEO out of his ivory tower and get him to actually just get a better understanding of what's what. There was also a point where we talked about kind of getting all of the senior leaders to talk to people, maybe, I hate to say like a step or two below the people that they would normally talk to, but to get them to open up a little bit more, to listen more to different levels of the organization than they normally would, because the truth of the organization is probably being filtered as it goes up the chain. Something else was that they just need to do something. He's wasted a year talking and worrying and thinking. He's only got another year, so something has to happen. And what we talked about there was to figure out what is the vision, what's one key thing we can do, what's the first quick win to get some change started, to get the momentum built, because they don't have a lot of time left, and they can talk for another year at the end of the day. And I think the other key thing was really alignment, related to alignment of goals and alignment of motivation. If you've got 3 silos, the leaders of those have to be reporting into the CEO. So if he's meeting his goals and getting his bonus, his goals should be cascaded down to them, so that in order for, they should all be winning, let's say, if he does. If they're in competition, it's never going to work. So if there's a bonus incentive for the key people in the silos, they need to make sure that their goals are aligned very, very, very particularly to what the CEO is trying to do, so that they're not all inadvertently, sabotaging each other. Anyone else from the team want to talk about any other parts?
No, all good. I think you covered everything. So it's a lot of lack of alignment.
Okay. And we did have a 4th breakout room. They had a small number of participants, one of whom left because she was trying to take a class while also being in the breakout room, and that didn't work. And then one of the other participants was in a restaurant, so could not actively participate. And so they ended up not having a conversation. And there are no notes up on the board. So Bill, I'll turn the floor over to you. How did you, and you're muted, but how did you actually work your way through this thing? Should be in the lower left-hand corner of your screen if you move your mouse down.
I guess you can unmute him, Brian. You don't have that?
No, I can't unmute him because that happens locally.
Oh, I see.
Come on, Zoom. Bill, if you want to log out and log back in, maybe.
It's going to be a cliffhanger, Brian.
Tune in same time next month.
Yeah, did you do this on purpose, Brian, in order to have us come back?
He
There
did
he
say
is.
you have a first
Yeah,
podcast.
I've sneaked back in. Okay. Technology great when it works. You hear me now?
Yep.
Well, thank everybody for their detailed thoughts. I wish I had you with me when I first started. We might have had some more options. So thank you very much. Now I'll go through what happens, what actually happened. Some of the things you mentioned did happen and some other ones didn't. But basically, symbols are fairly important in change. So we got him to redesign his office, and all the awards were taken out and put in another room because that was the past. And so when people came in, they just, the first thing you used to see was all these awards on the wall. And so we said, no, that's the past. Put them where people can go and visit them, but it's demonstrating. And he did a video of the success and where he wanted to take the organisation. He eliminated any unnecessary traditions that weren't adding value to the organisation and so forth. So our symbols are fairly important and send powerful messages. Now, to handle the sort of domination of these three blockers, we used a technique called network mapping, which if you want to find out more about it, I've got a knowledge base on it, or part of the knowledge base. So if you just Google knowledge base change management, Bill Sinnott's up at one of the usually 1 or 3 or 4, and you can go in there and find more about it. And that was to identify who the real informal leaders were. Some people call them the movers and shakers. Some people call the people of influence, people of credibility, the gatekeepers. Who make things happen in the organisation? We had to identify those. And
Bill, if I can jump in just one moment, those are the same people who can make sure things don't happen in the organisation.
True. Yeah. If you want change to be successful, they are the key ones. And you won't find them in the org chart. The org chart will not necessarily show them. They don't have the so-called formal authority, but if they like what's going on, it happens. If they don't like it, it's not going to happen. This is a different story, but when I was working in the Pacific, I was working with one of the large organisations in Fiji, and the most important person in the organisation was the head cleaner, because he was the tribal leader of the CEO. So if you really want to know what's going on in that organisation, you went and had a yarn to him and he would tell you. Yet if you looked at the org chart, you wouldn't even think about it. So you've got to find out who these informal leaders are, the ones who make things happen. So enablers, all sorts of names you can use for them. And that network mapping is a good way of doing that. And so we agreed, we identified 25 people who were the informal leaders. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Yeah, we identified 25 people. So we took the formal and informal leaders away for a 2-day retreat to go through what needed to happen in the organisation. And by using certain tools and techniques, again, they're all available and the knowledge base I've just mentioned if you're interested, because he was traditionally just using the 3 unit heads plus the administrative officer as his transitional team, and that wasn't working because they were all for keeping the status quo. But by doing this, taking the 25 away and going through a series of tools and techniques to expose them to different things, he had a chance to communicate directly to them. Now, the reaction of the union leader was interesting. He came and he sat down at that retreat, and on either side of him, he had two cohorts helping him. So he had like his security next to him. Now, that their non-verbal said they didn't want to be there, but they had to be there because it was compulsory to come. On the second day, he gave a presentation about something that we should be doing. And the CEO ran up to me and said, "Bill, will you shut him up? He's talking too much." I said, "No, he is getting complete ownership of this whole process. If he wants to go on another 20 minutes, he can go on another 20 minutes," because he was one of the pivotal informal leaders. So the key was identifying the informal leaders, getting them together as a group and explaining and using tools and techniques to demonstrate what needed to be done. So all of a sudden, the 3 unit heads, they tried to white ant this whole session. They were actively trying to stop it and enforce their own views. But the momentum got so strong that they actually got pushed to one side. And I wish I had a video to show what their faces looked like. And so on, to the extent that soon afterwards, 2 left and one decided to join the process. So that was the breakthrough for him. And also to demonstrate how he had a bit of a learning to understand what was going on. He said, Bill, I am the leader. I will have the vision. I said, okay, write it on that blackboard and we'll ask people to make comments on it during the 2 days. He got a rude shock. It wasn't shared. So he realized he had to change a bit too, and so forth. But that whole getting those informal leaders together, that was great. I remember running into one about a month afterwards and I said, how's it going? He said, oh, those 3 upstairs are still playing silly buggers, but we know what needs to be done and we're often doing it. And so forth. So very, very powerful. And you have to, it's risky, but you have to have the right tools and techniques to use there to make sure. They ended up designing. It was them co-creating. So using these tools and techniques, they ended up with a management plan of how they're going to do it, a bit of an action plan, who's going to do it, what, when and how. So if you get those right techniques and use them right, they're very powerful. Now what happened, and they learnt new skills. We introduced them to concepts like creative thinking concepts, and also mind mapping, etc., which they'd never been exposed to before, as other ways of looking at problems and solving problems. And my role was facilitator, nothing else. I wasn't there to put any ideas up. It was them using these tools and techniques, so they found out the solution, identified their real problems, found out how to handle them, the solutions. So what happened? Well, the CEO got his promotion, so he was pretty happy. He went on to bigger and better things. But unfortunately, his replacement was of the old school. And he wanted to go back to the old ways. Now, the transitional team asked me to please stay around and try and convince him otherwise and put pressure on. And we had a few sessions. He gave in a little bit. Well, we weren't that successful, but he gave in a little bit. But what happened is that in a couple of years afterwards, a global organisation took them over and kept basically one of their phrase, the good guys, and got rid of the dead wood, etc. And I was lucky enough then to be pulled in by that organisation. I ended up a lot more work because they said stay with us and work with other parts of the organisation. So that's, I've given it, there's a bit more involved in that, but that's how that one worked. And again, coming back to the selection of the tools and techniques so the people identified the problem themselves, the real problem, the real challenges, and then the solutions were a lot easier and so forth. Again, all these are written up in the that knowledge base. So you just type in knowledge base change management. Bill Sinnott's one of the 2 or 3 top ones there that you can then sort of go in. So that's going in via Google. It's probably the easiest way. So that's it in a nutshell. Some of the things you mentioned happened, some didn't happen, and some might have sped up the process and made it better. I still run into people who are involved in that, who are working with different organisations, and they have taken those tools and techniques and they are using them in their new positions and so forth. In fact, I walked into another organisation 10 years after introducing some tools and techniques, and they had a problem, and they said, let's use this tool. And I fell off the chair because it was 10 years since basically we told them how to use it. So they are really powerful. You have to be willing to massage them to suit the situation because every situation is different. Sorry, I've probably talked too long.
Emily, do I remember correctly? You said you were a certified coach. Do we have any other certified coaches here? Eileen?
Yes, I'm integral coach.
Alec and Jennifer, I know you've had some training. As I'm listening to Bill, what I'm really hearing is him consulting with the organization, if you will, as if the individual organization were a coaching client. Them defining what the challenge is, them then finding it within themselves, who they have to become and what they have to do in order to achieve that success. And again, we were talking about culture before, as Bill was telling his story about moving the awards out of the office. Again, examples of artifacts that give a message. And anyone, where does culture live in an organization?
The people.
Inside the people. It's the mindsets and the behaviors. Bill also used the word co-create, and in that podcast that I was telling you about with Nancy Murphy, that's one of the skills that she is talking about, that women typically are much more, have a much greater tendency to work toward co-creation. Just very quickly, a little neuroscience lesson about communication and co-creation. And it comes from the work of Judith Glasser, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but Judith's great part of her career was around the neuroscience of conversation. And she identified 3 levels of conversation. There's information exchange. You know, my name is Brian Gorman, and Chris is from Pennsylvania. Level 1. Level 2, which is so often what we're trying to facilitate people through, is this is my way of seeing things, and I know I'm right. No, let me tell you why my way of seeing things is right. And very often, you know, if you've got the traditional leadership that sort of says we're going to do this from the top down, it's level 2 communication. Level 3 is co-creation. And co-creation takes trust. And so again, listening to Bill's description of that offsite, it took a while to build, it took that first day to build trust with the union leader so that he could let go of his security guard and get on board and be part of co-creating the solution. And we all know as change practitioners that the more engaged people are in building that solution, building that path forward, the more they own and are committed to succeeding at it.
Just to reinforce that, I mean, if people own it, it's theirs. It's not the consultants, it's not the CEOs, not the boards. They'll make it happen.
Any final questions, thoughts?
Just one quick question, Bill. Did you design the activities or did you solely facilitate them?
No, I designed the activities, but based on talking to the different stakeholders and so on, and getting their views of what they. One of the main questions I asked, what do you think the challenges are, and based on that, then selected tools and design the sequence of them to help them analyse and get to the real important issues. Sometimes we call them the undiscussables. People won't discuss them because they're just too sensitive.
Just a quick question, Bill, I'm wondering how you over time designed your tools and techniques, to build your business. I'm imagining, this was a career.
They're all in the knowledge base. There's 350 tools and techniques in that knowledge base, and they're broken into sections. So if you have a particular problem, look at it, and that's me, reading over decades and collecting things over decades. I'm all the time looking for new tools, techniques, etc. And it's massaging. You just don't take them at face value. You need to change the words sometimes for the organisation to get it right. But it's helping them, and it's unbelievable if you successfully choose the right tools. Everything falls into place. It makes your job as a facilitator very easy. I even had one group.
I'm looking at your knowledge base right now, Bill. Oh my gosh. Sorry? Thank you. This is gold. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm about to actually put another 200 A4 pages of information. That's been upgraded all the time. It's and so on. But it's any feedback appreciated too if you're in there, because we're still developing it. And I think 70,000 people have already used it. So it sounds as though it might be getting popular. But yeah, that's the art. It's getting the right tools that will work in that situation. And anybody who only has 5 or 6 tools is going to have problems because they're not going to work in every situation.
Okay, two final things to wrap up. Just first of all, thank you, Bill.
Well, thank you, Brian, for the opportunity, and thank the people for their inputs.
And that was the second half of number 1, which is thank all of you for being part of this experiment. And just a quick 1-question poll before you leave, if you can select how valuable you found the experience. And once again, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This was
Thanks,
fantastic.
everybody.